Good morning, everyone. I shall commence the lectures on topic 1.13. So we have gone through the basic principle. So this basic principle that was highlighted in gray and others, or common law concept, you will use it only when you are going to challenge. Okay, so you're going to challenge these other lawyers will make use of all this to check whether it is going to be strong or not on your rights in relation to LD. But now, this is if you're going to the court. These are the things that you have to look into. But now, if you are only referring to your contract, in this case, PAM 2018 as the foundation, then you need to know what are the rights, power, duties, and responsibility of the parties involved. In this case, the contract administrator is acting as a representative of the client or owner to administer the project. So what are things that the contract administrator need to do in order for the LD to be able to be successful? So these are the things that is contractually. So if you look at the questions or issues, is related to your contractual aspect. You must use your PAM to support your argument. In the event there is an interpretation in your PAM where you find that there is a common law or judge interpretation already, then you bring it down to support, because this interpretation is going to be valid in interpreting your standard form. So you make use of the judicial decision that is made under the common law section to support your PAM interpretation. If there is no interpretation, then whatever is interpreted within this so-called document will be the temporary correct, as long there is no challenge. If there's a challenge, then the court will decide, and after the decision making, you bring back the decision, and then the contract administrator will have to administer the contract as per the court findings. I hope you are clear on this important basic concept. Okay, so now we go on to the PAM on relation to so-called LD. So when LD is imposed, when the contractor unable to complete the work by the original contract date, if there is no extension of time, so this is the date after it expire, then the LD, the employer got the right to impose LD. I use the term got the right only after the expiry of the original completion date. Type 1 or type 2. When there is an extension of time, there is a new date established by the contract administrator. So that means the original date is already been extended by the contract administrator. There will be a new date. Then after the expiry of the new date, then only the employer got the right to impose LD. If not, you can't impose LD. So for LD imposition, there are procedures to be followed. We will look into that later. So this is very important. If the contractor is delayed already, so what can the employer do? Number one, as an employer, to let the contract to continue. So if they let the contract to continue, although the contractor is already breached, then usually the employer will seek to recover the loss and damage suffers due to the breach. So this is one solution. Okay. or the employer can repudiate or terminate and then claim for the loss and expense. So in order for the employer to do this repudiation under the contract, so you must refer to PEM 2018 before you can repudiate. See, in the common law, if the so-called impact is very severe, the employer can repudiate. But now we're talking about contractually. Contractually, to repudiate, you must look at the procedures or whatever term that is in the PEM 2018 for the employer to repudiate. You don't simply follow the common law because now you're operating under the PEM standard form. So you must look at the PEM contract on when the employer can repudiate. That means to end the contract and then claim for the loss and expense. So generally to the employer, if it is not serious, although it's provided, so the employer will recover the contractual mechanism, as I mentioned earlier, through the clause 22 of PEM. So you need to look at the clause 22 of PEM to invoke this so-called LD. Okay. And on top of that, in order for you to carry out this, to determine the contractor's employment or terminate the contract and so on, this one must do clause 25.1. So this clause 25.1 will tell you how to determine the contractor's employment. If not, you don't touch. So you must go to 25.1. So if you got the right to impose LD, you go to clause 22 and not 25.1. If you invoke 25.1, contractor is going to go home already, bye-bye already, okay? Will be chased out from the project site. So if not, you let the contractor continue, then you try to recover damage. How? Then this clause 22 becomes operational. Alternatively, the employer may want to claim for UD. This one alternatively. Alternatively, the employer may claim using this method if the rights within the PEM 2018 is not applicable. See, so UD is an alternative right given to the employer when the PEM clause is not applicable. That means the clause 22 not applicable. Maybe the employer did not do the paperwork or the architect did not do the paperwork properly. Okay, so this is an alternative to claim UD. So this is the using the common law rights. So this one is using the common law rights. UD is using your common law rights. Okay, so through the court. So this one is how it operates. So please be careful. On the PEM contract, usually you go to your number 1, clause 22. Okay, and then if sometimes there is a administrative error, you cannot claim using your clause 22, then your contractual rights are extinguished. But it doesn't mean the end. The employer got another weapon, that is going to the court, asking the lawyer to file for the claim, that is UD. Okay, so in this aspect, we are going to the PAM, we are following the PAM clause rather than the court. I just mentioned you here that there is always an alternative. It doesn't mean the end. If the employer failed to do the paperwork, it doesn't mean the end. Similarly, let's say it's for the contractor who failed the paperwork on the extension of time, which we're going to cover later. Okay, the same thing. Contractually may be extinguished, but then there is a process going to the court. I hope you are clear on this. So LD will be the most common remedy in getting the so-called contractor the rights to continue, but have to pay something. That is the LD. So under the PAM clause in Malaysia, is slightly different from other country. I mentioned because if there is no challenge, I repeat, if there's no challenge on the LD imposed as computed by the consultants and agreed by the contractor, then the normal principles apply. How many days delay times the how much the amount per day in the appendix applicable. But if there is a challenge, then it is not so straightforward because of the presence of this Act of Parliament, that is your Contract Act 1950, Section 75. Okay, so this case is between Sewa Kumar and Thiagaraja. So under this case is on the LD imposed by the employer, and then how the court interpret it. Okay, we have also in this Johor development case, which is in the year 2009. Okay, Sewa Kumar is in the year 1995, and in Johor Coastal Development versus Kontrajaya in 2009, the judge reaffirmed the principle in Sewa Kumar is still applicable in Malaysia. So give you some overview of the background. So now we go to the details. So in order to understand LD, you need to understand clause 22. Okay, clause 22, there are a few subclauses only. First one is clause 22.1. Okay, so important thing in clause 22.1 will tell you the procedure before the employer can impose LD. So clause 22.1 is related to procedures. So what are the procedures that the employer need to do? So first thing is, this is item number 1, must happen. Contractor fail to complete the work by the due date or its extension. Okay, that's number 1. Point number 2, architect then need to issue the certificate of non-completion after the expiry of the completion date. So this is the important point, but there are some other nitty-gritty things need to be done by the architect before issuing the CNC. We will study after. I will elaborate to you a little bit more. Okay. So only upon the issuing of the CNC, certificate of non-completion, then the contractor may have to pay already. Okay, so may have to pay the employer. I use the word may because the amount to pay is subject to employer's discretion. Okay, so the employer shall pay or may pay. The contractor shall pay, but it's up to the employer to deduct. It's up to the employer to deduct. Okay, so you see the word here, employer may recover such sum. See here, contractor shall pay means must pay. Employer may recover is discretionary. Please understand the two words. Shall is must pay. May is discretionary, whether to impose today, tomorrow, 1 month later, 3 months later, and the amount, the full figure, part figure is up to the employer. Okay, so employer may recover as a debt. Why? As a debt in a situation where the money is not sufficient. Type 1. Type 2, deduct money due. That means from the work done. Type 2. Okay, this is type 2. Or recover from the performance bond. So employer got 3 ways to recover the money. So number 1 is by a lawyer letter. Okay. Number 2, deduct from the work done. This is the typical one. Number 3, recover from the performance bond. So these are 3 ways. Okay. But before that, employer must inform the contractor. See here the word here, shall. That means employer must inform the contractor before imposition of the LD. So these are important procedures. It's provided in your clause 22.1. Okay. Yeah. So now this statement is important. Imposition of LD by the employer shall not be taken into account by the architect when architect prepare the interim certificate. I already repeat many times. This one is a private deduction. Okay, the amount to be deducted is a private deduction and not to be reflected in the payment certificate. The payment certificate will only reflect the work done, previous payment, any deductible, then amount due to the contractor. If you are QS or the architect preparing this certificate and you sign them, less liquidated damages, less interest, less set off, you are totally wrong. Because under your PEM, these 3 items cannot reflect in the interim payment certificate or in your final certificate. You cannot reflect. It's a private deduction. So whether it's interim or final, you can't reflect this item. 3 items. LD is one of them, interest, and number 3rd one is set off. So these are the procedures that need to be followed. It's reflected in your clause 22.1. So now, 22.2. What is this clause is all about? So this clause is drafted to try to circumvent the liquidated damages requirement for actual loss to be computed by the employer. So because of the Sewakuma case, later I'm going to go through with you that in order to post LD and there is a challenge, the judge says that the employer must show the actual loss suffered, then only you can claim. Okay, so if the contractor did not challenge, then the LD amount times the date of delay will be deducted. So this clause is trying to circumvent the court's decision where if there's a challenge, then the employer must work out the actual loss suffered. So whether this clause 22 is strong or not, depending on future cases. Okay, So I will let you know afterwards. Now, what is the current position on clause 22.2, even though it is redrafted again and again, try to circumvent the impact of Sawakuma case and its judicial decision. Okay, so LD, first of all, it have to be genuine pre-estimate of the loss or damage will suffer. So this is the argument of the drafters of this clause. So it's a genuine pre-estimate. So in the event the contractor breach clause 21 and 22, that means that they are subject to LD. Then the parties agree by entering into the contract. So this is what they try to say. Parties agreed. It means the contractor and the employer pre-agreed. By entering the contract, the contractor shall pay the employer the said amount. So this is what the drafter of PAM clause 22.2 intend to tell. The parties agree means the contractor and the employer. So whether this is possible or not, as I say, is subject to future court case. Okay, so without the need for the employer to prove actual loss. So this is what the consultants or the drafter of the document try to portray, without the need for the employer to prove actual loss if there's a challenge. Okay, so how they put it drafted in such a way, this is something very innovative. Unless the contrary is proved by the contractor. So this clause 22.2 is pushing the burden of proof to the contractor, which is here, this so-called item here. Burden of to the so do you think this is workable? The rule in our common law system is that a person or the claimant, if you want to claim anything, who to show the proof? It must be the claimant. So now the claimant here is the employer, but now pushing the burden of proof to the contractor. So do you think this is workable? Later on we go through again. So this is how the clause 22 is drafted to circumvent the impact of LD if there's a challenge, to push the burden of proof to the contractor, so that the employer can get away of proving the actual loss. Then you go to the clause 22.3. So architect issues, this one will tell you that you can't issue CNC until all the EOT's items are reflected. Okay, so architect shall issue certificate extension of time under this relevant clause under your PAM, so that now you fix a new date for completion. Okay, fixing a completion date which is later than the date stated in a certificate of non-completion issued. So what they're trying to say here is, if there is a CNC issued previously, and then there is a new extension of time that is superseding the old or the previous extension of time, then this old CNC will be revoked. So this extension of time, when given by the architect, following this clause 23.4 or 23.9 and 23.10. So 23.4, 23.9, 23.10, it is about the it's okay, 23.9. Okay, extension of time issued after the CNC. So if the contractor receive any extension of time after the CNC issued, what does it mean? It means that the previous CNC is going to be ineffective. So this is what I try to mean. So you need to add to the previous extension so that you get the new extension period. Once there's a new extension period, the old CNC is going to be ineffective. That is clause 23.4, 23.9, then clause 23.4 is your certificate extension of time. This is the typical extension of time after evaluation will be issued by the architect. So 23.4 is the first extension, and then 23.9 is the new extension. 23.9, okay? 23.9 is the new extension. And then there is another one, 23.10. If the architect review, also give another new extension. So 23.4 is a first extension. That means if there is no 23.9 or 23.10 in operation, so any expiry of the first extension, CNC can be issued. And then the employer got the right to impose LD from that date onward. If after the extension given under the 23.4, then further the architect found that, oh, there is new extension of time can be issued under clause 23.9 or clause 23.10. Then this is what it means. Okay, so this clause 23.9 to 23.10 will come up with a new extension of time. So once a new extension of time, the old completion date will be revised. Okay, so when did this happen? If there is a CNC issued earlier, now the CNC is going to be not effective anymore. That means it is revoked already. Clear? So that is the meaning of this clause 22.3 on what happened to CNC if there is a new extension can be granted under clause 23.9 and 23.10. Okay, so if there's a case, if the employer were to deduct earlier already the retention sum, then the employer have to refund the money to the contractor. This is the meaning. In the event the employer have deduct the LD amount earlier, then this additional amount have to be refunded to the contractor. So this is how it operates, because now a new extension of time, it means that your LD amount will be getting lesser and lesser. That's why it have to be returned to the contractor. So this is the meaning of this part. Okay, so with the redrafting of this clause, the whole exercise is to ensure the employer don't have to prove this loss and damage without the need for the employer. This is the key reason why 22.2 clause is drafted. Okay, and push the burden of proof to the contractor. I can't imagine how can the contractor prove this. It's something quite so-called odd. I don't know. This is what the drafters of PAM is introducing. Okay, so this is an innovative way of redrafting the PAM clause 22.2. If you got a chance to go to your 22.2, or maybe the 22.2 is not even present. If there is a 22.2 in earlier, like 2018, I'm sorry, 1998, your PAM, you go and read through, the description is going to different with this 22.2. Okay. So this clause is keep on repeating this item because the employer says, why must I show actual loss? But whether possible or not is up to the court. Okay. So this is pushing the burden of proof. Can only be rebutted by the contractor. That means pushing the burden of proof to the contractor. So this is what the drafter think, revising this one to circumvent the federal court decision. That is a Sawakuma decision. Okay. So do you think it will be successful? So this is a subjective view. Okay. To see whether the court do endorse the drafter's view on the proposed as proposed above. So you need to study if there is new challenges on this issue in the future in Malaysian environment. So this is something for you to think about that could happen in the future. Okay. So now we go back to some fundamental again on what is the meaning of liquidated damage. So all this exercise from now on here will help you to, this part of the exercise will help you how to improve your quality of your answers. Okay. So all these will improve on your quality of your answers. Okay. So I highlight in yellow. So these are the approaches. When you see a LD equations, these are the basic things that will help you improve. Okay. For example, as an introduction, you will look into the definitions. So it so happens that there is no definition under this. 2018, 2001, 2006, and 2008 are the same. Because since I changed everything to 2018, then the clause are modified slightly here and there. So this is the definition. There is no official definition in your PAM 2018 because you look at the article 7, there is no such word there. So what will be your general definition? Okay, so it will define. So this one will be the usual meaning. Okay, so and then it is a genuine pre-estimate of the loss. So these are the key points on what is the definition for your liquidated damages. Okay, so another thing is fixed and advance. This is a very important principle. LD must be fixed and advance and make known to everyone. Okay, so this is what is LD, and we are not talking about general or UD. Okay, general or UD is something totally different. When you hit general or UD, then you must prove actual loss. If you go for this category, yeah, so if you hit on this one, you must prove actual loss. In the case, the employer must prove actual loss. No two way about it. Okay. So what happened is on your LD, the characteristics is for you to have a idea. So agreed amount fixed in advance. This is the key point. It had to be genuine pre-estimate. And then this sum must be stipulated in the contract. I keep on repeating this again and again. It must be reflected in the contract. See here, this one, it must be reflected. This one must be reflected for sectional or for the one phase or multiple phase. All this must be reflected. If you don't reflect, your LD is ineffective. Your clause is ineffective contractually under the PAM. But then the employer, if you want to claim, you can go for your common law. Okay, contractually, I'm talking about, we are dealing with PAM already. Okay, so important thing is recovery must be triggered by a specific breach. So what is the specific breach here? It's usually under your PAM, it must be late completion. Okay, so this is the specific breach for your LD to be imposed. Next is how to recover LD by the employer. Okay, so these are the procedures that need to be followed. We already described earlier on the procedures. So now these are step by step, need to be done in a more detailed manner. Okay, in order for the employer to recover this LD, okay, necessary. That means the contract administrator must follow the procedure as stated in the contract. So in the contract earlier, we already mentioned what are the steps to be followed. So now we describe here one more time. Okay. So mandatory for architect to issue CNC. Mandatory. Okay. Mandatory for the architect to issue the CNC before the LD to be imposed. Okay, without such certificate, deduction is illegal, and the contractor may get angry and then determine the project. Okay, so don't simply deduct. Give the contractor the ground to determine the project. Okay, so in the event architect refuses to certify a date with which the party do not agree, both can give notice to arbitration. So this is what the importance of evaluating all the EOT. Okay, so in the event architect refuses to certify or certifying a date with which the party do not agree. Okay, so either the contractor not agree or the employer not agree or doing the work not properly, then each of them can refer this to arbitration. Then both parties don't agree. It means the or do not agree with the architect's evaluation, and they can seek the help of arbitrator to resolve it. So now we go to clause 22.3. Earlier we mentioned already about the any new EOT will supersede the old CNC certificate. Okay, so in the event the architect issue certificate extension of time under these clauses, under this clause, a new extension of time to be issued is under this 23.4, 23.9, or 23.10. Okay, so fixing the date previously issued, the CNC that is previously issued. Okay, So such extension of time certificate will revoke the old certificate. Okay. So if the old certificate is revoked, then any amount, okay, any amount that is retained by the employer, that is a higher amount retained by the employer, must be returned. Okay, that means the surplus have to repay to the contractor when the new extension of time is computed. So this is the principle behind it, because you're over deduct already. Okay, so this is how you do it. Okay, if the work is not completed by the completion date, that means what you say is in another scenario, after granting a new extension of time and still cannot finish. Okay, so if the work still not completed by the revised date, that means a new completion date. Here, work is not completed by the, should I put there? Okay, completion date. Then architect will issue a further CNC. So this CNC is a new CNC, or I call it CNC number 2. So this CNC number 2 is important. Only after the new CNC date, then employer can reimpose the LD. If not, employer must wait for the CNC to be issued before imposition. So this is a very important principle. As long as the architect forgot or failed to issue CNC at any time, LD cannot be imposed. The LD can be imposed only after the architect issue the CNC. It doesn't mean that the right of the employer to impose LD is extinguished. It means that the right to impose is delayed. If architect fail or delayed in issuing the certificate of non-completion. I hope you are clear. So now, if CNC is issued by the architect, okay, so then the execution for the EOT as applies under your clause 23.8 here is, you can see here is A to Y already. Okay, then there is proper justification. So these are the procedures that the architect must adopt to ensure that the contractor have no ground to challenge the issue of the CNC. Okay, so the contractor is delayed by the events as stated in 23.8A to Y, and the contractor apply for it. Step number 1. Step number 2, then the architect have to review, or sometimes the architect may review the EOT independently under clause 23.10. Okay, so this is the situation where architect need to look into before the issuing of the CNC. Okay, so if there's such a new extension of time, then the old CNC will be automatically revoked and replaced by the new CNC if there is such a delay by the contractor in completing the work. Okay, so as usual, it's a repeat of earlier already. The contractor, the employer, have to revise the figure retained, and the new or the exceeded amount will be repaid back to the contractor. So this is what you're trying to say. It's a repeating of what we have elaborate earlier. Okay, so then if still cannot complete after the new date, then a new CNC will be issued, and then the employer got the right to impose the LD upon the contractor. Okay, so please remember, employer another condition to fulfill before you deduct. So what is the condition to fulfill? Written notice. That means that these are the procedures. Okay, must give a written notice to the contractor when the CNC issued. Okay, so at any time you want to deduct, cannot just deduct immediately. You need to give written notice as per requirement under the PAM contract. Okay, so the recovery of interest from late so-called recruitment is silent under this PAM. Okay, so recovery interest there is silent. Okay, generally interest is not refundable. That is the usual principle. Okay, unless there is expressly stated that this one is recoverable. So generally, if it is not clearly stated, it is not recoverable on the LD amount that is recruit late. Okay. So now we go back to a overall summary again. When there is a new completion date identified by the contract administrator. Okay. So the first certificate previously issued will be make so-called null and void. Okay, so will be will cease to be effective. Then contract administrator must issue a new CNC. Okay, so as usual, a precondition for deduction LD must give written notice. This is repeated above already. Okay, so if you don't, then the deduction will be illegal. Okay. So if in the event that after the new extension of time is longer than the completion period, then all these LD need to be refunded to the contractor. So less than deduct, then the employer must return the money retained. Okay. So in the event that the contractor cannot finish with the new revised date, then a fresh CNC to be issued, and then the process is repeated already. Okay, so interest to be paid is usually not a valid claim. So we have completed on LD in relation to the employer and the main contractor. Okay, so we take a few minutes break. We'll take a 5 minutes break here, and we will continue 9:54. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now? And see the screen? Hello, everyone. Can you see the screen? Okay. So, can you hear me also? Okay, thanks a lot. Then I will continue. Okay. So, we already completed the LD in relation to the employer and the contractor. So now this one is between the main contractor and the LD and the NSCs. This one is between the main contractor and the NSCs. Okay, so it's exactly the same. Now the principle: if the subcontractor cannot finish the work from the date, now this date here is between the main contractor and the subcontractor. Okay, so if this one is not compliant, then the main contractor will impose to the subcontractor the LD. So if there's a valid extension, then the new revised date will be the effective computing of the LD amount. Okay. So now, whatever LD amount per day will be applicable between the main contractor and the NSCs is independent from the amount from the main contractor with the employer. Okay. So here the employer here is main contractor. Please remember, we are dealing within this. Okay. So it will recover the amount between them at the rates stated in the appendix between the main contractor and the NSCs. Okay. So it is irrespective of the value of the subcontract work. So the figure that is imposed by the main contractor is between the main contractor and the NSCs. Okay. So the figure is high, if acceptable, then you don't blame the main contractor unless you challenge it, the NSC challenge it. If not, that figure is applicable. Even though the figure between the main contractor and the owner could be a totally different figure, even lower figure. That is not for you to challenge. Okay. So this is the principle applicable between the main contractor and the NSCs. So next thing will be, what will be the challenge available by the contractor, main contractor on the LD to destroy the LD claim? So this, for example, if there is no date in the appendix, so I mentioned already earlier, if there is no date in the appendix, here no date, yeah, here no date. Commencement date, completion date is missing. This one is missing. So there is no date here. So can you impose LD? The reason is very simple. If there is no date for completion, you cannot have a reference date to compute your LD. So this is the reason behind it. Then the LD will be destroyed. Okay. So we're talking about LD will be destroyed. That means that no LD can be imposed. So why? There must be a definite date or starting point for the LD to be computed. If there is no, then you cannot compute. Okay. So then what can the employer do? The employer rights to LD will be extinguished. Okay. But then what can the employer do? Employer then have to go to the general damage claim. Clear? So it doesn't mean that the LD is gone. The employer rights are extinguished. You still got the UD. That means you need to show actual loss. Okay. So this type 1. Type 2, the date intentionally omitted. Intentionally, purposely omitted. If such a situation, then LD won't be applicable. Okay. So on the contract itself, but the employer still can go back to this item here. Okay. To recover general damages. And then the amount will be, there is a ceiling. Or sometimes when you put something new in the appendix, NIL is not say blank, it's nil. So this one, the LD is not claimable, but then the UD is claimable. Employer to claim UD. Okay. Other areas will be time at large. So you already have the tutorial notes, time at large, claimed by the contractor. So under this, when there is no time for so-called completion or reasonable completion date is there, so chances are LD is not applicable. Okay. Or non-observance of the condition precedent by the employer. I did mention to you, all the steps is not followed, so you cannot impose LD. Or waiver by the employer. The owner waive the right to impose LD. So you cannot ask the contractor to pay because you waive. Okay. Or the invalid certificate of extension of time. That means the procedures are not done properly. Okay. Or practical completion is earlier than the certified. So what it means here, practical completion achieved earlier than certified. If you finish earlier than your completion date, definitely no LD can be imposed. Okay. So, or EOT being granted insufficient within the time taken. Okay. So when you apply for extension of time of 3 months, but then the contract administrator give you 1 day. Okay. I just give a very terrible example. Okay. So extension of time is insufficient. Then you impose the CNC after that day. So after reviewing by the judge or by the arbitrator, so this one is something that is unfair to the contractor. So a new date need to be imposed. So when a new date to be imposed, the previous LD amount or the extension of time figure need to be revised. So this is the rationale behind it. So now after that, we need to look into the position under your PAM contract. So this one, please understand them fully. Why this item is very unique. It is because you have this one, you have your clause 22.2 stating that don't need to compute actual loss. Okay. The position of LD in Malaysia under PAM, that is your 22.2. What does clause 22.2 says? That you need to show actual loss. But then, if there is a challenge, the position of liquid damage in Malaysia, if there is a challenge on this item, okay? So this is what the judge will look into it. Okay. So you have to go back to the common law position already. So the judge comes in. Okay. So if there is a LD claim for non-completion, okay, and then the court will not interpret your document only, but the court also need to interpret Contract Act 1950, Section 75. So how does the court interpret? Okay, so this is how the judge in this country interpreted this particular item. So under your Section 75, this is how the Section 75 read. So this is the exact wording of Section 75. Okay, this is the exact wording of Section 75. So from this, the judge interpreted. Okay, because when for us we read it, we find that it's quite difficult to understand this provision. Okay, so because of this, then the court interpreted this item. First of all, our Malaysian court will make use from the court judgment that is in India. Okay, so this is an Indian case interpreting the Section 75, because our Section 75 is copied from the Indian Contract Act 1872, Section 74. We copied it. Okay, so then we refer to the Indian case on how they interpret. So this is how the Indian so-called judge interpret on this Section 75. Okay, so this is how our Malaysian judges facing with the same issue interpret Section 75. Okay, so the court started off with saying that there is no difference between LD and penalty. So I hope you understand this term. LD is a predetermined figure. Okay, LD is a amount. Okay, but then penalty is also a very excessive. Okay, so LD predetermined amount is reasonable amount, but penalties is excessive. But the Malaysian judge says whether it's LD or penalty, no different. Why? Because at the end of the day, the claimant must prove actual loss. That is to them, say there's no difference in Malaysia. But in other countries like UK, there is a difference. If it's an LD, no need to prove actual loss. If it's a penalty, yes, you need to show actual loss. So that is the difference in UK. But in Malaysia, no different. Why? Because ultimately, whether your LD amount is genuine or not genuine, or is a penalty very excessive, no problem. Because the judge says you want to claim under the construction environment, you have to show actual loss. That is the reason behind it. That's why they say in Malaysia, no difference between LD and penalty. Okay, so if it's a penalty, then ultimately the court had to determine which one is reasonable figure or the LD. What will be the reasonable figure? Okay, so the principle behind it is this: if you want to claim, you must show the actual loss principle. This is the fundamental principle of claim under your basic contract. Okay, under the case of Hadley versus Baxendale. Okay, a plaintiff, that means a claimant, claiming actual amount damaged in exchange for breach of contract because the contractor is breached the contract because you cannot finish on time. Fair enough? Must prove actual damage. Okay? According to this principle. That is the Hadley versus Baxendale principle. Okay? So if any failure to prove, then no damage awarded. So any failure to prove, then no amount of money can be paid. Okay. So now this is how the court look at this Sawakuma case. If the court finds it difficult to assess the actual damage, type 1, if the court finds it difficult to assess the actual damage, okay, and the loss is not too remote, then the court will award a substantial damage, okay, to the claimant. So this is the principle that is adopted, okay. The damage awarded must not exceed the amount as reflected in your LD, in the contract, okay. So ultimately what the judge is looking at is this. There are two situations. This is situation number 1, where it is difficult to assess, okay, and then LD is not applicable and actual loss must be proven. This is happening in the construction contract. In another situation, that is the court can assess the compensation and then there is no need to show actual loss. See? So under this situation, is happening in the non-construction type of contract. Okay, so if you have construction type of contract, this is the first class or first type of case that the court will imply. Okay, that means the contractor will get away if the employer cannot show the actual loss. So in summary, that is the local position is a repeat of what I'm going to said earlier. Okay, so there is no difference between LD and liquidated damages. Why? Ultimately, the reason is very simple, because whether it's LD or penalty, actual loss must be proven. Okay, so it's different from the UK law. No, UK law says that if it's a LD, then no need to show actual loss. If it is a penalty, then it have to prove the actual loss. Okay, so the employer cannot recover the amount fixed in the contract. So he or she must prove the actual loss under this so-called Hadley-Baxendale principle. Okay, and then the amount that is suffered by the employer, okay, limited to the extent of the quantum of the agreed compensation. That means the LD amount. The highest amount claimable is the LD amount. If you show your actual loss to be much higher than the LD amount, you're only entitled for the LD amount. Okay, if it's lower than the LD amount, then the lower figure is applicable. Okay, so this is the principle behind this claim. So this is how the LD is operational in the Malaysian environment. So this one is just a repeat of what is described up there. So you can use this to support your principle on LD in Malaysia, or this so-called long elaboration here. Okay, so the local position, you can have this method to describe or you can use this alternative. It's the same. So whichever that you want to adopt is equally good. Okay. So now, because of Sewakuma, what is happening? We are looking into the post-Sewakuma now. Okay. So this post-Sewakuma is happening because a lot of the parties, especially on the employer side, try to find ways and means to circumvent. The whole principle of circumvent is try not to show actual loss, because it's a very difficult and tedious exercise to show actual loss. Okay, so post Sewakuma, that is what the drafters of PAM 2018 is trying to do. Okay, passing the proof to the contractor. Whether successful or not, from this discussion, you will know the current status. Okay, so under Sewakuma, this is the decision of the federal court, the highest in the country. Okay, so if this is the highest court decision, then the rule is this: the lower court must follow the highest court decision in this country. Okay, so there are various case law happen after the Sewakuma. For example, in Line Shipping versus Lo Ban Seong in 1996, and also Johor Coastal Development versus Kontrajaya in 2009. Okay, so what does it mean? Ultimately, from this, it shows that Sewakuma is still the current law. So after that, now they find ways and means to bypass. Circumvent means try to bypass, because the argument is very simple. The judge, the drafter points of view is this: employer have no time to calculate all these figures. That's why a genuine LD figure should be sufficient. There shouldn't be any actual loss to be provided. Okay, if they want to do this way, then might as well put it under the unliquidated damages claim. Okay, so this is the find ways to circumvent Sewakuma, because Sewakuma position is this here. Okay, here. Actual must be proven. Okay. If the actual is higher than the LD amount, then the LD amount is the maximum to be used. If the actual is than the LD amount, the lower is to be used for the pay. So this is a very important principle, because this is the Sewakuma principle. Okay, so if this is the Sewakuma principle, because of the need to prove actual loss. So they find ways and means how to avoid it. Okay. So by this is one possible mechanism that is happening in Hong Kong. Okay. So what they do is, under the doctrine of freedom to contract, that's why they use this. It's a freedom to contract. Okay. So once they are free to contract, then whatever is signed by the contractor and the employer, it should be imposed. Okay. So this is what they think is that is in Hong Kong. Please be careful. This one is in Hong Kong. Okay. So this clause 22 come into being, where the whole concept pushing the burden of proof to the contractor. Whether such thing is possible in Malaysia or not, there's something for you to think about. Okay, so you can use the Hong Kong case to support this argument. Okay, but to me, ultimately, whether the judge to follow the Hong Kong principle or our Malaysian principle, I still believe that our Malaysian concept on this Sewa Kuma is the ruling one. Okay, so personally, I believe Sewa Kuma is valid in the sense that our current position is based on the highest court of the land. Okay, for the other courts to bypass this highest court decision is not so simple, unless Parliament steps in to revise the Contract Act 19. Okay, if the Parliament were to step in to revise Contract 1950, if the Parliament were to step into 1950, then the actual loss requirement, actual loss may be so-called taken away. So it is the Act of Parliament. Okay, Act of Parliament can do that. That's what I believe personally. For the court to do it is quite difficult. For the drafters of contract document to do it is quite difficult. To me, the reason is very simple. If the drafters of a contract document can bypass the Act of Parliament, then what is the use of the Parliament in any country? That is to make laws. So any law that is made in Parliament can just be override by any of the contractual provision. It will be a laughing stock. Okay, so this is what I gather on the importance of the Act of Parliament. Okay, so with that we come an end to your section 13. Now we go on to section 14. Yeah, can you see this screen? Feedback, please. Can you see the screen and hear me with this now new section coming up? Please Feedback, please. Okay, I can see clearly. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for feedback. So now we go on to this so to me, basically in your so-called PEM understanding for your future needs, section C is a very important section. Okay, section C from site possession and so on. Now these are very important because these are the things that is QS, is your rice bowl to understand this section C. Okay, if you don't understand section C properly, your understanding of this contract admin is very, very weak. Okay, so section C is critical. Okay, thanks for your feedback. So now we go on to your sections 14, 1.14, that is extension of time. So extension of time, you need to understand your clause 23. Okay, contractual provision, clause 23, under your PEM 2018 or 2006. They are the same. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You can hear and can also see the screen moving. Thank you for your feedback. So under your PEM 2018 or 2006, the clause are the same, except there are certain items are added for the extension of time, the relevant event. So one extra added. So you can see compared to 2006, there's one extra item. Okay. The rest are almost the same. So why this EOT is important? Because if without this EOT clause in the contract, and then if the contractor got the right for extension of time, and then there is no relevant clause in the PEM for the architect to grant extension of time, it means that the project is at time at large. So I just give you the why this clause important. So I won't be putting down in words. I just repeat what I said just now. Why this clause is important. If the extension of time clause is missing from your PEM or any other contract, whether it's standard form or bespoke form, then if the contractor got a valid ground for extension of time under the contract, and then there is no valid clause or events for granting extension of time, then the project is at time at large. If a project is at time at large, it means that the LD provision in the contract is not operational, or the rights to impose LD is extinguished. I hope you are clear. Okay, so the significance of this clause is to give the rights for the employer a starting time to impose LD. This is the most significant point under this extension of time clause. Okay, so with this, then the employer is able to fix a new date for completion. So preserve the right to impose LD. This is the whole reason behind it, why you need this extension of time clause. If not, it will lead to time at large. So in the event there is no express clause in relation to delay for all this, then the contract completion date, what will happen if there is none there? What will happen is time at large, and then the contractor is to complete within the reasonable time, and then the rights to liquidated damages will be extinguished. So this is the most powerful statement here. Okay, so under your PEM 2018, clause 23 and the subclauses are the ruling one. So you need to pay special attention to clause 23.1 and 23.8. because these two are closely interlinked. Okay, so first of all, you need to submit notice and the particulars for EOT. Whether you're entitled or not, it must be linked to the clause 23.8 for the relevant events. So the relevant events, they are so-called 23.8 A to Y. Okay, so you have A to Y, which you will find in your PAM document. See here, 23.8 A to Y. That is your relevant events. So now you can see here 23.8. No? So you can see here A. 23.8A, the relevant events until 23.8Y. See here? Y. Okay? So these are the relevant events, A to Y. If it's not there, you don't claim for your EOT. It is all so-called fake EOT claim. So these are the relevant event, A to X. I won't go to it one by one. You need to go and read up because these are the reference point for your valid EOT application as a contractor. If you are working as a consultant, you will look at this. How the contractor claim for EOT? Contractor must quote any one of these or more than this in their submission for their EOT. If the contractor didn't support with this so-called relevant event, chances are the EOT application will be rejected. Okay, so as a contractor, you need to quote the relevant event. And the consultants, if you want to give extension of time, you may have to give the relevant events to the contractor for extension of time that you are granting. So contractor need to quote, consultant also need to quote. Sometimes the contractor will quote different clauses, and then sometimes the consultant will quote different clauses for the same item for extension of time. So this is something that happened in the industry. Okay, so it's up to the contractor whether you want to challenge the events that our consultants are using. Okay, I can tell you why the consultants are using different clause or subclauses. It is because that in some of the clause, they grant extension of time. Okay, then you're entitled for loss and expense. See here, this one, the clause A to X is given here. You got extension of time. But sometimes with this granted, then you have your rights for loss and expense. Your clause 24.3. Please understand this too. Okay, so if they grant you the extension of time already, then you got the right for loss and expense. So this is your 24.3. If it falls under 24.3A to your last item here, O, A to O, then you're entitled for loss and expense. So you can see why the consultants could be using a different clause. So the consultant could be choosing a clause that is no claim for loss and expense. Hey, so to prevent the contractor from claiming loss and expense. So this is a very important point. Why consultants granting extension of time could be different from the main contractor application for law extension of time. For this reason, whether right or wrong is up to the contractor to challenge. Okay, so as usual, I've come across in my working life, consultants are very smart. I grant you extension of time, but under which clause? For example, here, I give you a typical example which I come across in my working life. The consultant will choose this item to grant extension of time. I give you an example here. Okay, so whatever clause you quote, then you quote this one. Exceptional inclement weather. Okay, 23.8b inclement weather. Then or force majeure. So here 23.8a and b. So grant under these two categories. Then you look through. For your loss and expense claim, is there such a thing, inclement weather, A and B here? For your loss and expense claim, is nowhere to be found. Then you only entitled for time and no money. Okay, so if they grant you, let's say, it's 23.8C, then this is the claim. This is 23.8C. I show it to you above. This one, new one. See here, 23.8 so-called C. Let's say under this category. Okay, so loss or damage occasioned by insurance and so on. Okay, NSC's category. So if you have 28.8C, then you're entitled to claim. Or also not claimable. Sorry, this one is entitled for your not having the receive in due time and document. Okay. Yeah, here only start from 23.8E. From this point onward, only you can claim for extension of time plus loss and expense. That means that 23.8A to D, you won't be able to claim for time and money. Clear? So sometimes the consultant will use 23.A or B or C or D. Whereas if they were to grant extension of time from E to others here, then there is a possibility the loss and expense clause will be operational. I hope you are clear on this point. Then before you want to claim for extension of time, you need to follow the procedures. So these procedures is stated under your clause 23.1A and B. Okay, so this is step number 1. You need to notify the architect on the relevant events A to Y. Okay, so notification is mandatory. Fail to notify, game over. Okay, so but when you are given the chance to have extension of time, please, to be fair to the employer, contractor must work regularly and diligently as required under the clause 23.6. Okay, to prevent the delay further. Okay, because sometimes the contractor think, oh, this item I got extension of time, I can drag it as long as possible. It's not fair. So under this 23.36 will tell you that contractor must use best effort to prevent delay. I believe this is something fair and reasonable. Okay, so that the project can be delay, even though you're entitled for extension of time. Okay, so now on the concept of extension of time, mistake for architect, that this amount to obligation to mitigate a delay. Although the 23.6 is there, then it means that the architect can make use of 23.6 to force the contractor to minimize the delay. But it is not necessary every time it can be successful, because you cannot force the contractor to do something that is unreasonable. Okay, so if it's unreasonable, then the contractor will claim for that unreasonable cost. Because the consultant may think that, okay, since I got a clause to says that you must need your best efforts to prevent delay, then can you work overtime? Can you put more machine? Can you put more people? And so on. Okay. So this is unreasonable request. As long as the contractor is working regularly, generally with the existing force, you cannot force the contractor to do something that is out from the ordinary. Okay. Yeah. So this is ask the contractor to accelerate to meet the contractual obligation is not the duty of the contractor. Okay. So what are the procedure to comply is 23(1)(a). Okay. So it must be given within 28 days from the date of AI, date of CAI. So these are the starting point. Okay. And also commencement of the events under the neutral category. So these are the three situations. Okay. So within 28 days of AI, number one. Number two is CAI or something neutral category. Neutral category, there is no AI or CAI. It is for the contractor to raise it from good quality reference point. For example, news broadcasting, newspaper, announcement by ministers, and so on. So these are neutral events. Or the weather chart. Okay, these are neutral events because the consultant won't be informing you, oh, this one yesterday it rains, and today is also raining. So can you write in for extension of time? No, it is for the contractor to notify them using good, valid support document. Clear? So why it is important? It is a condition precedent, mandatory to comply, to entitle for EOT. If you don't do that, your rights for EOT could be extinguished or deleted. Okay, so these are important one. After that, already this is an initial notification. Then when the events are over, you need to use clause 23(1)(b). Okay, so within the 28 days, when the items already completed, okay, the delaying events are completed, then you need to give the full details on how much exactly you are entitled. So 23(1)(a) is a notification on the events on the approximate entitlement. 23(1)(b), within 28 days, you must give your detailed computation, detailed support on your actual entitlement. Okay, if you don't do that, chances are the architect may not be able to evaluate your EOT timely. Okay, fail to submit within such time, okay, may deem that the contractor does not need the extension of time. So no need to grant EOT to you. Okay, so this is the reason behind it. So contractor must provide the details as good as possible so that the architect can do the evaluation. Please remember, EOT is for the architect. It's nothing to do with QS. So be careful in future when you are working on the client side, and then you have no authority to talk about EOT in the so-called contractual sense. The architect may ask you on how to sometimes give an opinion, possible, but officially it is the architect to issue the EOT certificate. They may consult QS for opinion because, as I say, you have taken up the so-called construction management, project management, planning, and everything, so that you know how to make use of the so-called critical path method and so on to evaluate whether the extension required is a genuine one or not, and so on. See, so please remember, which I mentioned to you earlier, that an activity delay, it doesn't mean that the whole project delay is that amount. unless it is on the critical path. To calculate the actual delay from an activity that is non-critical, you have to do forward pass, backward pass to get your new construction duration. And even sometimes the sequence of events are changing or items of activities are added and minus. So I have to recalculate to come up with your new so-called project duration. That is important because this one, the architect may ask for your help to look into that. But officially, it is the architect's decision how much to grant. It is for the architect to put up that piece of paper. Okay, so as usual, if you are the contractor, don't simply try to push it around. Okay, so it will create a mistrust, and then the evaluation of the extension of time will be affected. Okay, so what happens if the NSAs are present? Okay, so on NSAs that are present, you have to look into the so-called nominated subcontractors provision and the main contractors provision. Okay, so you have to look into these two documents. If there is such an NSA available, then contractor must send a copy notice to him immediately. Okay, if there is any impact on the potential so-called on the project, because any revision of the extension of time given to the main contractor, the NSAs must know about it so that the NSAs can reschedule or replan the NSA's activity. Okay, because certain of the items could affect the NSA's activity. That's why the NSAs is entitled to a copy so that they can plan their work accordingly. Okay. So with that, I think I will stop here. So now let's see your attendance, okay? So 184, 5 of you are absent. So if you got any valid ground, better let me know now. If not, it will affect your 80%. Once it affect your 80%, then I can't help you. Because this case here is a valid reason. That's why I put that as not counted. Now just want to give me a valid reason. If you got valid reason, please let me know. I will update it now. Okay? So if don't, please don't come to me again saying that, oh, you must give me the contemporaneous reason and not the so-called already old reason. It must be the current reason. Okay. Okay. From here, I try to just have the support only. Okay. So thanks for coming, everyone. With that, yeah, there's a little announcement. I have to go for my so-called COVID shot. So for those in the afternoon, that is from 2 p.m. To 4 p.m. for the tutorial 2. Just in case I'm a little bit late, please bear with it. Okay. So I have to go for my so-called COVID shot. Sorry about that. Okay. So thanks for coming, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.